So, finally, I'm uploading a video on my Megane R26. As this channel is fairly new, I should probably do some explaining. For as long as I've been able to drive, I've had a bit of an obsession with Renault Sports, and that obsession stems from the first ever fast car magazine that I picked up featuring an ITB'd Phase 1 Clio 172. Since then I've owned quite a few Renault Sports, namely 172 Cups. The 172 Cup was probably the first ever proper hot hatch I purchased, and that was back when I was 21. Quite a few years later, it kind of feels right to perhaps move on. And that really is where the R26 fits in. Whilst the love and the charm for the 172 has never really worn off, there is a desire to perhaps own something that is a bit more mature and maybe just a little bit more grown up. Not that you would really think it though, looking at this car. It's covered in Renault F1 stickers, it has large 18-inch black alloys and mirrors to match, and all in all, it's hardly subtle. And of course, that's not even mentioning the rear bumper, which is probably the strangest rear to a hatchback we've ever seen, or likely will see. You can forgive it though. The R26 wasn't built or designed to look good. It was built to be a proper driver's car, and it's got that part down to a T. So aside from uploading videos on cars as and when I can get my hands on them, various different models, makes, manufacturers, I feel like this is long overdue in the sense that I want this car to be the main car of the channel alongside my low boost 172 Cup. I'm about 1800 miles into ownership now, actually probably closer to 2000, so I've had this car for around 2 months and I've been loving every single minute of it so far. Those that have seen some of my previous videos will know that I've driven a couple of these now. So I've driven my friend Amin's standard liquid yellow R26, and then later on my friend Kyle's high boost one. And every single time I've driven one of these, I've fell in love immediately with the driving characteristics and the dynamic of the car. So I knew exactly what I was getting myself in for when I picked the Megane as my next car. Now I should say also that before I delve into too much detail into exactly why I love this car so much and how great it is, I'm well aware that the 250 Megane and the 275, the 265s and then the Mark IV Megane RS are infinitely better, probably in every single way. I can't say that I've been fortunate enough yet to drive one of them. However, from what I've seen, they are far superior in every sense of the word. Whilst more modern versions of the Megane RS do have superior build quality, superior chassis, superior engines. One of the Megane's biggest charms is just how pure it is, in the sense that it's still a fairly raw hot hatch. It doesn't have a whole lot of trickery up its sleeve. It is very much what you see is what you get. The outside is leery, there's stickers all over it, and they were available as an optional delete from factory, but I actually really like them because I think that they form an important sort of part of history, if you like. They were made in celebration of Renault's F1 win, and in fact the R26 was named after Renault's winning F1 car. So in that sense, it all comes together to create this quite special hot hatch, and that's before you get behind the wheel. One of the things that you first notice when getting behind the wheel of the car is just how composed and sharp the chassis is. To say that my 172 Cup is a handful in the corners would be probably the understatement of the year. But driving the Megane along the exact same roads, its superior chassis and that front differential literally make the world of difference. Capable of covering the same roads, albeit at a far greater pace. But then again, they are completely different cars. One is heavily modified, whilst the other completely standard. And I think that's one thing that shines through here. This is a completely standard example, and yet, to drive, it's absolutely brilliant. Its firm chassis is perhaps slightly crashy at lower speeds, especially when you go over bumpy ground. However, you begin to forgive that when you actually want to push on some nicer tarmac, and the car remains incredibly planted on all corners. What I can say is that those that have driven hot hatches before, immediately when they get behind the wheel of the R26 or any Renault Sport Megane, will notice that not only are these chassis incredibly composed, they're also dynamic too. You can get cars that are very stable and that feel stable in corners, but they're not able to change direction, and that is one thing that you notice straight away with the Megane, is that it's very light. It's only 1,355 kilos, I managed to remember that, in total. So it's a bigger car than my Clio 172 Cup. However, it's not a whole lot heavier considering the much improved chassis that you get with this car. Renault revised the dampers on this car and the springs and basically the suspension overall from the Megane 225 that came before this. And whilst that does make a big difference to the way the car drives, and it's a much improved drive, it does make it a little bit crashier. But that is all forgiven when the car is just so flat-footed in the corners. Helping that is a limited slip differential. Now, when they first introduced limited slip differentials to hot hatches, I think the Mark 1 Focus RS was the first, and people didn't really get on that well with it. It was a bit of a bad introduction to LSDs in hot hatches. It was too aggressive, it took over too much on the straights and kind of ruined the danger element that you would get in a non-LSD hot hatch. But in the Megane, you do not feel it one bit on the straights.
In fact, rather than hinder the R26, the differential in this car is actually one of its key defining characteristics, and exactly what separates the R26 from all of the Renault Sport Meganes that came before it. Its agile and easy to point chassis is only complemented by the differential, which you really only notice when you're trying to corner hard. This in turn alleviates any sort of understeer that you would normally experience in a front wheel drive hot hatch. And of course the Megane does have a 4-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine, and whilst this particular car is only running around 250 horsepower, the differential deals with that incredibly well.
One thing I've learned over the past year is that Renault don't make the best engines, and I never had that opinion anyway, but I've definitely learned that the likes of Honda, for example, their engines being naturally aspirated have a lot more character than this. This is an F4R 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, and don't get me wrong, it sounds great outside, it sounds alright inside, and it goes well. It's 250 horsepower, 288 pound-feet of torque, and it's been remapped by Engine Dynamics. Other than that, this car is fairly standard, but the engine isn't exactly noticeably characterful. It's not anything special, but it's decent enough. Inside, the build quality is, well, it's a Renault. But anyone that's driven a Renault, you know, maybe, I don't know when they started to stop rattling, or if they ever did. You know, I own a 2003 172 Clio 172 and this, and both of them rattle. This one less, so if that pattern is anything to go by, perhaps more modern Renaults don't rattle at all. Who knows? I've got everything I need in here, including climate control, which I didn't have in the Clio, so that's a bonus. And the seats, this is a Luxe Pack edition, so you have leather door cards, full leather Recaros, and auto lights, auto wipers, and there's also the black pack too. So you have the black wheels from factory, you have black mirrors, and a couple of other bits on it. But yeah, I mean, one thing I have to say about the Recaros is that being full leather and not the half leather Alcantara, is that they don't hold you all that well. I'm slightly on the bigger side, should we say, and I think that really they're not the best. I do slide around in them quite a bit when you begin to push on. They're quite grippy, but yeah, and if you wanted to take one of these on track and get really serious with it and push this car to its absolute limit, then you'd probably want to fit yourself some aftermarket Recaros and maybe save these as spares.
Whilst some 12-13 years have passed since this car was actually registered on the road, it still seems to be fairly well put together inside. Yes, it's not full of fancy satellite navigation systems or digital displays. However, because of that, it has aged somewhat fairly well. There's nothing fancy or incredibly exciting about the interior of this car, minus the seats. However, there is a charm in that. It's basic, it's fairly raw, and in a sense, that kind of lends itself well to the overall car.
The car's also had a mid back box delete, and that does mean that when you give it a boot full, it squeals its head off. It's got this weird high pitch whistle-like noise, and at first I was worried and thought that it was a turbo, but it's not. It's just the back box. It kind of whistles its head off, which is odd. The brakes are absolutely brilliant, as you would expect. They're Brembo 4-pot brakes, and I think this car, the previous owner, fitted uprated brake lines or braided brake lines to the front and rear, and it stops fantastically. And I'm actually really enjoying how balanced it is overall, and I think that's one of the key things here. Is I've talked about the Megane, is that overall it's such a balanced hot hatch, whereas in my Clio you could drive it hard and it would feel like it wanted to chuck you into a hedge. This isn't that. This is just not that. When you brake as well, it stops you and it feels stable. In the Cup, it felt like if you were going to brake, because of the master cylinder and the rear adjuster for the bias in the Cup, it was all up front, so you felt like the rear was going to almost overtake the front when you brake too hard. But in the Megane, it just stops like this. It's just, yeah. Overall, I have to admit, I'm just made up with this car. I really am. This is everything I want out of a car in a hot hatch, right here. And in that sense, maybe this is a bit boring, because I don't think that I'm going to really be doing many modifications to the car unless they're OE parts that need replacing and it makes sense to upgrade them, i.e. the exhaust system is rot, it needs a new one, go aftermarket. The intercooler needs replacing, go aftermarket. But other than that, I think I'm just going to keep this car as it is and enjoy it. At the moment, you can still pick these up for a decent price. They vary a lot. So I paid quite a bit for this, I'll be honest, and it is a fairly low mileage example at 52,000 miles. 2,000 of them being the ones I've put on them recently. So it's done a fair bit in my ownership already, considering its history. But you can pick a higher mileage one up for around £5,000-6,000, maybe sub 5 for a decent one. So yeah, they are about, and you can get them. I would recommend, if you wanted to get your hands on one, to go on the Facebook Megane R26 Facebook page, which I'll put a link to in the description. And if you join that group and keep an eye out, there's always cars coming up on there. On eBay and on other public websites, there's hardly any, but there's loads on there to be had. And yeah, I think I've probably talked everyone's ear off too much now about how much I love this car. So yeah, thank you for watching. I will share more Megane content soon, including stuff that I don't like about the car. I do like running costs. And yeah, anything else you want to know, let me know in the comments below, and thank you for watching.